Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the occasional Saturday episode here on the SFS channel, right before Sunday kickoff for Week 14 games. We usually don't post this late in the week. However, we've been busy, so we've been stretching out our posting schedule here and giving you guys a video just about every day, but not quite as a condensed output of information as we usually have. So our last video of the week prior to Week 14 action here is my rest of season running back rankings, my top 24 players at the position for the fantasy playoffs and any final regular season games that you all have for the 2021 season. So without further ado, I'm not wasting any more time. Drop down, give today's episode a like before we get started, and let's hit the intro and get into it. All right, here we go. At the number one spot, we've got Jonathan Taylor here in a bye week here in Week 14, but I do not care. There is a really hard-pressed argument to say that any other player is a better option the rest of the way once he returns from that bye week. He is literally in competition right now with LaDainian Tomlinson in terms of single-season running back records with consecutive games with 100-yard rushing performances and a rushing touchdown. He is doing some unworldly things this season. His explosiveness in the open field is fantastic. He's a three-down workhorse back, and this offensive line has been a phenomenal asset to him this year. JT is the best running back on fantasy rosters and in fantasy lineups the rest of the way, again, when he is playing in games and not on the bye week. So sticking with him at the number one spot here. No reason to move him out of there. Dalvin Cook at the number two spot. Now, how about Mr. Cook returning just 11 days after his dislocation of his shoulder? He's already played his Week 14 contest. Hopefully you started him, put him in the lineup after seeing that late news prior to the Pittsburgh Steelers and Minnesota Vikings game, but holy cow, he looked like he was on a different level than everyone else on the field. The explosiveness that he had in the open space, I mean, he really kicked it up a notch and was on another gear than the other players were out there. The holes that the offensive line was creating were also just immense, and he had so much room to run before he was even contacted. So when you're getting him out in space and he's not being touched until he reaches the safeties in the last level of defense, that is something that is really, really impressive to see. And again, for a player as explosive as Dalvin Cook, you just can't stop that. 27 carries, 205 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did it all in that contest. This is one of the most talented running backs that we still have healthy this season. I was really, really happy to see him return back to the field and get back out there producing points for our fantasy lineups. He is clearly the most valuable player in that Minnesota offense, and he is going to be a major piece down the stretch for fantasy lineups. Austin Ekeler, how about our PPR machine for this season with Christian McCaffrey dealing with injuries and not being available the rest of the way this year? Austin Ekeler's the next best thing. He's got 3 or more receptions in every contest dating back to Week 1, where he was held catchless. That has not been the case in any of his games prior to that point in time. He's scoring touchdowns. He's another integral piece of his offense, and he's been a very, very dependable player, which is obviously what you want to see from players this high up on the list. He's a 3-down, do-it-all player, one of essentially the only factors in that backfield for the Los Angeles Chargers offense. I love Austin Ekeler, and in particular this week, we have a unique opportunity where he could be potentially even more utilized with the potential absence of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, depending on how their COVID situation being on the COVID-19 reserve list plays out in the coming 24-hour period after this video goes up. So stay tuned for news on them. If they're not in this contest, that could mean even more work for Austin Ekeler as both a rusher and receiver, as they could potentially be down their top 2 pass catchers outside of Ekeler on that roster. Najee Harris also already played his game for this week, but man, this guy absolutely loads up on the volume in a week-in, week-out basis. He even said it in his pregame interview. He is not surprised to see himself amongst the top running backs in the National Football League in terms of usage and amount of volume heading his direction. When you draft a running back this high, you use him, and you run them till they can't run anymore. Hopefully Najee Harris has a lot of miles left on, or a lot of tread left on the tires there, but Najee is a super talented back, another 3-down player, 104 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns in this contest. he is so dynamic, so important to this Pittsburgh offense because for the vast majority of this season, they've struggled to stretch the field in the passing game and make chunk plays. So Najee has been that underneath target that Big Ben can check the ball down to and have as a dependable threat in that phase of the game. And he's also been a player, obviously, when you're in that three-down workhorse running back role that's going to see a lot of touches week over week and a lot of utility for fantasy lineups. He is certainly a top 5 back the rest of the way for me. Joe Mixon right now, he's battling through some illness. His availability at the time of recording for this Sunday could potentially be in question. He is coming off of a rough game against the Chargers this past week where he lost a fumble. He did have 19 total carries, but he wasn't as efficient as we are accustomed to seeing him be because he was on an absolute hot spree up until that game. But we're going to throw that aside. The Bengals as a whole were kind of a disaster in that game. Joe Mixon, though, is another. This is the key here. We have a lot of workhorse running backs at the top of the list for today's video. These are the players that are essentially doing everything that their offense asks of them. They're not situational players. They are three-down backs that don't particularly come off the field for any reason here or there. Mixon's their touchdown back on the goal line. He is their passing down back. Now they will bring in Samaje Perine here and there for a rest or a breather for Mixon. But if they could work Joe Mixon and give him 35 touches a game, I'm sure the Bengals would do that. But no player can stand up to that level of use and that level of physicality and contact in the NFL for now in a 17-game season, 18 weeks, 17 games with a bye. So Joe Mixon, a fantastic option to have here. I don't like the Cincinnati offense as much as I do a Los Angeles Chargers offense. That's the reason for having a Austin Ekeler higher than him. And Najee Harris has shown some more consistency to me. That's ultimately what puts Mixon down here at this number 5 spot. Cordarrelle Patterson at the number 6 position. This is a super dynamic player, more of a wide receiver running back hybrid than he is any one individual position, but that gives us a lot of upside in our fantasy lineups. I talked about a few weeks ago how in matchups where the opposing rushing defense is really tough and really stout, Patterson is still getting the job done and finding ways to produce. In the game I zoned in on was the Saints contest where New Orleans is one of the toughest rushing defenses in the league, and what the Falcons did in that game was they split Patterson out wide as a receiver, and he absolutely cooked them in that phase of things. So the fact that we're able to play Patterson at the running back position is such an advantage for us and those of us who own him in our leagues. This is a guy who has a lot of upside in store the rest of the way this season, and when you're catching passes while also receiving rushing attempts and having the skill set that he does, that's again a very, very useful tool for fantasy owners. Nick Chubb at the number 7 spot here. This is someone who I have trending down right now. The Browns offense as a whole has been going through some kinks, some bumps, and I don't think that they're operating at their maximum efficiency right now. Additionally, as it relates to Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt is back on the field, which I think will dig into Chubb's overall upside and ability to produce elite numbers on a week-to-week basis because of some touchdown vulturing and the fact that some of those goofy reception opportunities that Nick Chubb has had in the past are now no longer present. We saw Nick Chubb actually catch a touchdown pass. We've seen him stretch down the field, and teams really don't cover him because they don't see him as a threat in the passing game, but he has made a few plays here and there since since Hunt has been out of the lineup. I now expect those opportunities to disappear for the most part with Kareem Hunt now being back out there. And again, the Browns not having an explosive offense or having the level of output that I think they could have is something to be concerned about as well. Last time around, just 2 weeks ago when they played the Baltimore Ravens, the opponent in question here in Week 14, they had a very low level of output. In particular, not much of a run game was established, and that resulted in a quiet outing for Chubb. So keep an eye on that. I think he has a fairly safe floor, though, because of the offensive line, which has become a little bit banged up throughout this season. However, I still have a good enough feeling about that unit, and then just the opportunity with the rushing volume that should be directed his way. Alvin Kamara at number 8 here is someone who, if Kamara, the only reason, now I think I'm undervaluing Kamara here at 8, and I will acknowledge that right away, but I don't want to just shoot him up the list in his first game back. Now, he's got a fantastic opportunity here against the Jets this week. I totally expect and think that Kamara can give us top-level production here, but I'm going to be conservative with my assessment of him because he's missed multiple games here dealing with that hamstring and knee issue. So I want to give him some time to come back and show us that he's officially available and ready to go before I just go ahead and jump him over some of fantasy's top producers that have been available in lineups for the recent past here. So Alvin is 1,000% a more valuable fantasy asset than a Nick Chubb when he is, again, 100% of what he is capable of doing because he catches passes. That's the most dangerous part of his fantasy profile. And then the fact that he's also scoring touchdowns and is basically the best offensive player in that Saints offense. So Kamara at 8, Leonard Fournette at number 9. I would love to have playoff Lenny a little bit higher, especially with the great work he's been doing in the receiving game as of late. There's actually been some jokes around out there on some NFL talk shows that Leonard Fournette is basically transitioning into Alvin Kamara 2.0 with all of these flat routes and all of the swing passes that Tom Brady's been throwing him. That's not the case. He's not nearly as skilled of a pass catcher, but he is a very capable dynamic back that can catch passes and do that stuff. He does have a pretty tough playoff schedule here, though. He has Buffalo and New Orleans left on the schedule. Those are two teams that you don't exactly want to run into here. But if you can hold off and get into your fantasy championship week against the Jets when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers play them, you could just have a player in that matchup that makes the difference for you in that game. However, again, the matchups leading up to that point in time are rather difficult. He's a goal line asset, though, and as I've been touching on, he's been catching passes at a very high rate that we haven't really expected from him in the past. I love to see that. I hope he can keep that going down the stretch. If that's the case, he will be a top 10 back the rest of the way. Antonio Gibson here at the number 10 spot. He has really salvaged his season here from being what looked like a terrible bust in the middle to late second round of our fantasy leagues, at least as far as 12-team league purposes go. He was not showing the part for the first half or even two-thirds of this season, but now he's really turned things on as of late. He's gotten his health in check. He's started to see more volume, and this team has really started to establish their identity as a running football team. Their offensive line has gathered some pieces that have been out with injury, and so the efficiency has been better. And when the efficiency is better, they're more apt to continue running the ball at high clips, and that's what we've seen Antonio Gibson thrive with here over the last 2-3 weeks of time. So I expect with a really solid playoff schedule down the stretch that he can continue to put up fringe top 12 numbers for us on a weekly basis. I'm excited about what he can do. He's also had his highest level of receiving output in any 4-game stretch over his last 4 contests. So a lot of positives here down the stretch for Antonio Gibson. Elijah Mitchell, this is one that I'm a little bit cautious on here at the number 11 position. I think that he could certainly trend down the list because of some injury issues that are a bit scary right now. He has some knee irritation as well as the fact that he's been in concussion protocol for this week. So the hope is that he doesn't miss any time. The hope is that he's 100% healthy, ready to go. We'll see if that's ultimately the case on Sunday. But the production, the output, everything he's given us when he's been available, that's the key here. When he is available, has been phenomenal and fantastic. He is a high-volume rusher, and he's turned on the receiving involvement as of late as well. That wasn't something that we saw overly all too much over his first half of the season. He is becoming a more involved pass catcher. He is getting rushing touchdown opportunities. And this 49ers run game, Kyle Shanahan just makes it work with any running back. And Elijah Mitchell has been the player that has reaped the rewards of being in this situation for the 2021 season. We'll see if that's the case going forward into 2022. But as far as this individual year is concerned, down the stretch, if he is healthy, if he's out there for San Fran's offense, I think you can expect great things from Elijah Mitchell. He'll be a very dependable player. He has a very favorable schedule. He's just got to overcome those injury bugs and concerns that have me a little bit questionable about him right now. Ezekiel Elliott is down at the number 12 spot. The reasoning for this is he just hasn't looked as explosive as of late. Zeke hasn't been making the big plays. Tony Pollard has been such a big influence and factor in this offense across this season. And Zeke is dealing with, or has been dealing with throughout this season, some knee irritation, like I kind of just talked about with Eli Mitchell, that I think has held him back from being his best self, which we saw him be early on this year, but that quickly tapered off. So the one piece of, I guess, hopefulness for Zeke's volume, at least, is that Tony Pollard is a game time decision for this week. He is dealing with some injuries as well. So we could see Zeke's volume against Washington here in Week 14 increase as a result of the lack of health for Tony Pollard. So not rooting for Tony Pollard to be injured at all. That's not what I'm trying to say here, but at least in terms of Zeke owners, you're going to get a good feel after Week 14 if he is the lone 3-down back for this team, what to expect in the matchups and in the contests closing out this season. Darrell Henderson at my number 13 spot. I guess I could say Darrell Henderson / Sony Michel because Darrell Henderson has been banged up here, and he was limited very much so last week with a quad injury. Didn't really play in that game. He was active and available on the sidelines, but he was not utilized because, again, they were trying to maintain his health and get him in a better spot for this coming week's game. But he's still been questionable and limited in practice throughout this week. I'm hoping he's able to go against the Cardinals here. There's a lot of injuries. That's the theme of today's episode, is that injuries at the running back position greatly shuffle up the board each time I make this episode. That's why we have to do it every other week. I could probably do it every week if I wanted to as well, because, again, these injuries play such a significant role in the availability and the status of fantasy running backs. But Henderson here is in a great situation. He plays for an offense that has the capability of high levels of output, and that means more goal line touches. That means more sustained drives, more opportunities to have volume on a per-drive basis. The Rams have gotten a little bit cute with making an overly large amount of attempts to hit big plays over the top. I think they just got to get back to the basics, though. Run the football, set up play-action passes after that, and then you've got the wide receivers on the boundary to make those plays once you establish the run. But we've seen them get away from that a little bit as of late. That's overall shown a dip in their outputs and, honestly, the win column, because they haven't been able to keep up and score with teams, and they've been having costly mistakes because they're too pass happy. Lots of interceptions for Matthew Stafford. Again, it's a small fix. I think the talent is there for this team, and Darrell Henderson or Sony Michel, whichever one's the lead back, should reap the rewards of this system. Javonte Williams at number 14 here. I would absolutely love to have him higher, but I don't want to overreact to one game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Javonte absolutely showed me what he's capable of doing in the 2022 season, where I don't expect Melvin Gordon to return to this team. However, Melvin Gordon is expected to be available this week. They think he can give it a go, and I don't think they're just going to flat out cut him out of this offense. Maybe Javonte Williams becomes the quote-unquote starter and sees a slightly higher level of involvement than Melvin does. But, again, he's not going to have this backfield completely to himself, most likely, like he did last Sunday night until the 2022 season. So, to me, that makes him a high-level RB2, and I think a player who has top 12 upside. But that type of performance we saw last week should not be expected in every game down the stretch from here on out, unless Gordon is not available or unless we hear news that Javonte is the guy going forward for this team. So, love the matchup versus Detroit. Love the talent. Love the skill set. Everything is perfect here for Javonte Williams, except for we need more information about the week-over-week volume. James Conner at number 15 here. James is moving down the list for me a little bit right now with the return of Chase Edmonds. We have yet to see what that means for Conner, because James Conner was not putting up these ridiculous numbers while Edmonds was on the field. He was still scoring touchdowns, still being a productive fantasy back, but the top 12 weekly numbers that we were getting out of him weren't necessarily a factor while Chase was healthy. Since he's been in the IR, though, James Conner's been one of the better and most underrated backs in fantasy football. He is, I believe, tied for second with 12 rushing TDs across the year. So a lot of nice things with James here. He can do a lot. He's not necessarily the most explosive running back or the most dynamic player, but he is well-rounded enough that he can get the job done when asked to provide a 3-down role. Again, though, with Chase's return here, I don't expect that to be asked of him anymore, and I think that Chase will be the passing down, 3-down, or the third down running back, that is, not a 3-down back. Chase will be the third down passing situation running back for this team, while James Conner I expect to return to his role of seeing occasional first and second down reps, but his main focus being goal line and power run situations. So we will see James Conner again. There's a lot of question marks here. I think that this week in particular, we will see the most limited fashion of Chase Edmonds in this offense, because in his first game back, they're going to ease him back into the role. However, Week 15 and beyond, I think it becomes more of a 60-40 role or maybe a 65-35 opportunity for Connor after that point. David Montgomery at number 16 here for the Chicago Bears. I love the closing schedule. I love the player. I love the physicality, the dependency this team has on him to be the playmaker for this offense and to keep drives moving. He's got a whole lot of talent, a whole lot of effort on each snap. If you watch David Montgomery, he runs the football hard, and he has a 3-down skill set. We haven't seen Tariq Cohen return to the offense this year, so Montgomery is still handling a lot of the receiving work. There's a lot to like. So essentially what needs to happen here is the Bears need to continue feeding David Montgomery the football, and if that happens, he has the talent and the ability to be an efficient rusher. Game scripts could potentially be an issue down the stretch, but that's not something I anticipate being an overly large problem after seeing last week against Arizona, where the team trailed for 2 scores throughout most of that game, and Montgomery still had one of his best outputs of the season. James Robinson at number 17 here. James is another player with a great closing schedule. However, I don't know if we can trust the situation as much as I would like to. Urban Meyer benched him last week for a good chunk of time since he's had back-to-back games with a lost fumble. And overall, the Jags offense is just kind of a dump. And I've said this multiple times throughout the year. They go as James Robinson goes. So if they don't have a steady rushing attack, if they don't have a quality movement of the football up front, this team falls behind really fast, and they struggle to have any sort of offense after that. So if teams shut down the run game, the Jags have nothing else. They can hit the occasional big play because Trevor Lawrence is a very talented passer of the football, but this is not a technically sound offense or an efficient group of football players yet. So there's a lot that I would say eats into James Robinson's potential and upside because of that. It makes me a little bit less bullish on him down the stretch of the season. Again, the matchups are nice and the opportunity is there. However, with the coaching circumstances with Urban Meyer, the fact that James was benched last week, which I don't expect Carlos Hyde to be the starter this week. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do just have my questions about this Jacksonville team as a whole and how that could potentially play a factor in James's value and upside. DeAndre Swift at number 18 here. Sounds like he's not going to play this week. That's resulting in him being lower on the list. He's got a great schedule as well. Championship week, he has the Seattle Seahawks, which are one of my favorite teams to see on a fantasy running backs playoff schedule. They're one of the easiest groups in the league to get a push on, open up some nice running lanes, and have some explosive performances. Swift will hopefully be available for that opportunity. In the meantime, it is Jamal Williams, who I don't think has the explosiveness as a player that Swift has. He's a fairly complete back, has a 3-down skill set. However, again, he is not super explosive in the open field, which is something that DeAndre Swift very much is. I think that when we take a look at Swift and the Lions situation, there is some concern that maybe they'll shut him down for the rest of the year, keep one of their core centerpieces of the offense healthy for 2022. I hope that's not the case. We haven't heard anything that would be indicative of that to this point. But if Swift is out there, I think he's easily a weekly top 12 back in PPR formats. He gets touchdown opportunities, catches a whole lot of passes, and is a crutch for Jared Goff in this offense. So a very valuable lineup piece when he's available. It sounds like week 14 we're going to have to go without him again if he is on your roster. So hopefully you can make it through that point in time. Aaron Jones at the number 19 spot, someone I am increasingly lower and lower upon. The playoff schedule starting this week with the Bears, which is a matchup that Aaron Jones seems to always have quieter games against. They play really tough physical football against the Packers in particular, and they don't really let them establish a run game until late in the contest. And then you add in the fact of A.J. Dillon, and we'll talk about A.J. Dillon in a second here because he also cracks the top 24 rankings, but he has eaten so much so into Aaron Jones's his working volume and opportunity that we can no longer classify Aaron Jones as anything close to a 3-down workhorse running back. Now, he has a 3-down workhorse skill set, but that's not the way he's being utilized, and that's important. Situation matters here. And Aaron Jones' upside has taken a real hit since A.J. Dillon's been introduced into his offensive role for this team in 2021. So a lot less upside. I would say the floor at times isn't all that great with Aaron Jones either. And especially when you're not getting a lot of touchdown volume and production. He's returning from an injury. Now he has been back for I believe he just played the Rams game prior to the bye week. But aside from that, Aaron Jones had that MCL sprain. There's multiple factors in this situation that don't make me crazy excited. And coming from a Green Bay Packer fan, this is something you would expect me to be higher on Aaron Jones than, but I don't like what I'm seeing right now. I don't believe in Aaron Jones being a top 12 running back the rest of the way this fantasy season. I just don't see any way that's the case while A.J. Dillon is still on the football field. Josh Jacobs at number 20 here. This is a player who you don't really love to have Josh Jacobs in your lineup. His ceiling isn't overly that impressive. However, with Kenyon Drake now out for the year, I also don't mind having Josh Jacobs either, because I think that means more opportunities to catch passes in the absence of Drake. I am a little bit worried about this week in particular against Kansas City with how these two teams matched up last time. I think that hopefully there will be more of a competitive game than we saw, 2-3 weeks ago when these two teams played. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about here, the Chiefs had 5 passing touchdowns from Patrick Mahomes alone and just ran the Raiders off the field. So that is a bad game script for a fantasy running back. But essentially the situation here for Josh Jacobs, he's not an overly explosive running back, but I do expect him to have a 3-down workhorse role for this offense. I think he'll have a lot of volume, hopefully an increased level of pass catching opportunities. And if they can keep his touchdown production at a level in which he averages 0.8 to 1 touchdown per game the rest of the way this season, I think that there is a strong case that he finishes as a quality running back too for our lineups. Saquon Barkley here falls below Josh Jacobs because I ultimately believe more in the Raiders offense at this point. That was the main difference maker. Now we all know who Saquon Barkley is capable of being. We all know what the ceiling could be. But this offense is really, really bad. And with Daniel Jones not in the lineup, it's even worse. There's a reliability issue here. There is, honestly, at times with Saquon Barkley, a health concern if he's going to be nicked up and if he's going to be 100% ready to go for our teams. That's obviously been something we've dealt with yet again this year. It was one of my things that I was not too worried about coming into the season, but again, kind of presented itself as an issue for us. So I believe more in the dependability at this point of a Josh Jacobs at the number 20 spot. I believe more in the consistency and the floor value we get out of him. Now, clearly Josh Jacobs' ceiling has nothing on what Saquon Barkley could be just because of his talent level. However, the Giants are a big factor here in why Saquon is lower on the list. Clyde Edwards-Helaire at number 22. The one concern that I think is very valid that's out there with Clyde right now is that Darrell Williams has become a lot more involved as a pass catcher for this team in Clyde's absence, and he really showed how valuable of a player he can be in that phase of the game. That's the one thing that I think puts Clyde lower on the list today than I would like to have him, because I think he is a really talented running back in his own right, in particular a pass catcher. Now, if he has less volume and less opportunities, obviously that's going to result in less production for him at this position. But coming back now, he's had a couple of weeks under his belt heading into this matchup with the Raiders. I think that the second time around for these two teams, we'll start to see Clyde get more and more of a snap count percentage for this offense. The more work, again, that he gets, the better. The more volume that comes his way, the better. And he's most effective as a pass catcher, and that was something that wasn't very involved in this situation early on in the season, and I think can be down the stretch here because Kansas City's trying to get back to the basics. They're trying to make the simple plays and to make the easy plays happen as opposed to just rocketing the ball downfield. They're trying to play a lot more structured offense right now because they have been having offensive woes and struggling throughout this season. So I think that plays to Clyde's benefit here and can keep him in the RB2 conversation, at least as far as PPR leagues are concerned. Now, A.J. Dillon here at the number 23 spot. So we just mentioned him a couple minutes ago with Aaron Jones. A.J. Dillon certainly has the capability to be and certainly has the skill set and talent to be a top 12 fantasy running back. But this is kind of goes two ways. So we talked about how Aaron Jones eats into A.J. Dillon's fantasy value. Aaron Jones then turns around and does the same thing for A.J. Dillon. Dillon is clearly the larger, more physical running back, the more aggressive player in this offense, the guy that's probably going to see more involvement in the goal line circumstances and in third and short scenarios. However, he's also a very skilled pass catcher. The one issue here is that, again, these two players are not overly out-snapping one another in terms of the amount of playing time they get. They usually alternate drives, or sometimes you'll even see them both out there on the field at the same time. It's a rare circumstance that that's the case, but these two players are really detrimental to one another in terms of the maximum level of output that they can have, because they're each involved. They both have a force in this offense, but neither of them is really overly allowed to have a high level of volume in a given contest or produce significantly more output than the other, because they each have such differing functions and they are both so versatile that they play different roles for this team. So A.J. Dillon, we saw flashes of what he could be, in particular once Aaron Jones got injured against Seattle. Dillon went nuts. We also saw A.J. Dillon do very good things against the Rams with Aaron Jones back out there on the field. It's really hit or miss. I don't think either of these players have an excellent floor the rest of the way this season, but I do think they do have nice ceilings. Dillon, of course, being a player who late in contests is going to wear defenses down, tends to get some of those late goal line opportunities. That's something to factor in here. This will be a really interesting thing to watch throughout the offseason to see how we approach these players in 2022. It's kind of a mess right now as we end up the 2021 fantasy season, but again, A.J. Dillon I would have as a lower end RB2, and Aaron Jones is just on the cusp of being in that middle range. And then finally, Kareem Hunt here. Now, this is more predicated on projection than it is recent production, because obviously Hunt has been injured, but seeing his level of involvement, seeing his touchdown vulturing tendencies in the early stages of this season, I feel confident that he will retain or regain his role, rather, from earlier on in the year, and that's ultimately what's going to give him his value. Kareem Hunt was actually outscoring Nick Chubb for a significant chunk of time this season because he was getting more touchdowns, because he was catching passes, which is not traditionally a function we associate with Nick Chubb's fantasy value. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of things at play, and then obviously once he ended up getting injured, Nick Chubb regained the vast majority of the three-down work for that offense. So Kareem Hunt, though, as he gets more integrated in this offense, as he becomes more involved down the stretch, they just had their bye week, and now I think that he should be fully capable of going back to 100% of his usual involvement. We're going to see him, again, start catching passes. Once they get down the goal line, if their offense can increase its efficiency and effectiveness, get some more goal line opportunities to punch the ball in for 6. There's a lot of running backs you could have here at this number 23 or 24 spot, but ultimately Hunt's talent and what his role previously has been with this team is what keeps him at least in the list as far as today's video goes. All right, those are my top 24 running backs for the rest of this fantasy season. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comment section below regarding your team's Week 14 matchup. I'm happy to try and get back to as many of you as possible prior to kickoff on Sunday. I'll probably stop answering questions late on Saturday night or early on Sunday morning, as I've got the community Discord to get back to and gold members who are obviously paying for my guaranteed response. So I've got to get back to them first, but I will get back to as many of you guys as possible, again, prior to Week 14 kicking off. So drop those questions down there for me below. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys next week. Peace out.